A truncated debate on part one. It's about the Auckland plan process, and endorse the comments made by Phil Twyford and David Parker, because it's interesting that the government is all about simplifying and streamlining and fast-tracking and providing certainty for applicants, but in terms of providing any certainty of regulation and having the Auckland plan apply when it is notified, rather than when and have the rules have weight on notification rather than when the whole process is finished. Of course, the government doesn't want to do that, and so it hasn't made that provision in the bill for the plan to have the rules to have weight when it's notified, which we oppose. But I'd like to talk about just the whole plan process and the appointment of the hearing panel, because the bill has got quite specific provisions around the unitary plan to streamline the plan process and to reduce community input, and it gives the ministers very significant control of the process, because of course it's the ministers for the environment and conservation who are going to appoint the hearing commissioners. They'll determine how much they're paid, and they will set the terms of reference for the hearing commissioners, not Auckland Council, even though it'll be Auckland Council that is paying those commissioners. And the whole fast-track process that the bill provides for the Auckland plan is certainly not one that the Green Party is enthusiastic about, but it has accepted and not opposed it because of the wide range of public support for that, for getting a plan finalised, to recognise the bigger Auckland now needs a plan promptly. But the bill provides, with the minister having the appointment process, again, it's an example of the very centralised, anti-democratic decision-making that this government is becoming just part of its whole image now, is a very centralised decision-making, shutting out the public. And our preference is for the Auckland Council, not ministers, to appoint the hearing panel. Yet I have proposed a very modest and reasonable compromise in Supplementary Order Paper 281 that the ministers and Auckland Council jointly appoint the hearings panel, and would like the minister to say why that is not a reasonable proposal, because it would be much more democratic given the mandate that Auckland councillors has from those who elect them, and that it's Auckland's plan, not ministers' plan. And the joint appointment process would much better represent a partnership between central government and local government than the very command and control approach that is this government's favoured modus operandi. And Mr Chair, if you look at the departmental report, it says that ministers should appoint the hearings panel to ensure that the panel is, and I quote, fully independent from the council, end quote, so that, and I quote again, the panel's recommendations will not be biased towards the council. But having a panel appointed just by ministers risks its recommendations being biased towards those that the ministers and the government will favour. The joint appointment process in the supplementary order paper would avoid that. So that's why we're asking the Minister and the Chair to seriously consider this joint appointment process and say why it's okay for the panel's recommendations to be biased towards those that the government would agree to, but not that it be biased towards the council. And this whole appointment process is yet another example of the disdain which this government has towards local democracy, and how it is grasping and grabbing power to the executive and centralising decision-making. It's become a real hallmark of this government. So the other issue I'd like to talk to is the whole way in which the scope of submissions operates in the bill. Because it's clause 125, which puts a new provision in the Local Government Auckland Transitional Provisions Act to allow the hearing panel on the unitary plan to make decisions which are beyond the scope of submissions on the proposed plan. So they can effectively make a decision on any matter that the panel identifies through the hearings process. This is an extraordinary broad power, and it's a very substantive and inappropriate departure from existing law. And all of the 31 submitters that commented on this provision expressed concern about it, because it's giving the hearings panel unfettered discretion. And when you combine that with the fact that ministers are appointing, Mr Chair, ministers are appointing that panel, that is giving them a huge scope to influence Auckland's future by the decisions that they make, recognising that the Auckland Council's ability to appeal those decisions is very limited and is only on the basis of the decisions that they disagree with. So when you've got a power of the Environment Court to make recommendations outside the scope of submissions, parties are given an opportunity to comment on and respond to those recommendations. But the bill doesn't provide an equivalent provision for the hearing panel to invite such comment when it's proposing to go beyond the scope of submissions. So, Mr Chair, that is a very broad extra power that's going to this hearing panel. And, Mr Chair, it blurs the whole boundary between adjudication, which is the proper role of the hearing panel, and plan making, which is the Auckland Council's role. And so the supplementary audit paper in my name seeks to limit the hearing panel to making recommendations which are within the scope of submissions by deleting this decision-making power to go beyond the scope of submissions. And that would make the whole plan-making process or decision-making process much more robust, because the hearing panel would have to base its decisions on issues that were raised by submitters and that had been the subject of evidence that was presented by the submitters and tested through the submission and hearing process. The other issue I'd like to comment on is the whole status of the spatial plan, the Auckland plan, and clause 140. Because you've got the government talking about simplifying and streamlining, and if the government was genuinely interested in that, rather than promoting an anti-democratic, anti-environment, anti-community agenda, then they would have responded to the submissions of the Local Government New Zealand and the Auckland Council, asking that the hearing panel give more weight to the Auckland plan than simply ensuring that regard has been had to the spatial plan as clause 140 subsection 3 currently provides. And we need to ensure that the unitary plan is consistent with the Auckland spatial plan because of the very high level of public and community support for that plan, and because of the way it's an integrating document. As Local Government New Zealand identified in its submission, you've got a problem in local government planning because the Local Government Act, the Land Transport Management Act and the Local Government Auckland Council Act and the RMA don't talk to each other. Yet the spatial plan does that integration and seeks to have a much better planning because of that integration. So the spatial plan is quite a comprehensive and a long-term strategy for Auckland's development. It looks at the present and future mix of residential, business, industrial and rural activities within specific geographic areas of Auckland. It looks at how you integrate that with essential infrastructure services and investment, with transport, with open space, with water supply and wastewater. So the unitary plan is the critical tool to ensure that Auckland Council can achieve the outcomes that it set out in the spatial plan. And that spatial plan was developed through quite widespread engagement with the community and with stakeholders. So simply ensuring that the hearings panel just has to have had regard to it isn't giving it enough weight. And it should be that the hearings panel has actually got to ensure that it's consistent with, its decisions on the unitary plan are consistent with the spatial plan, because, as Phil Twyford highlighted, just how that plan will shape the future of the city. And the other issue I'd like to comment on, Mr Chair, is just the way in which the bill in Part 1, but that will affect the way in which the Auckland Council operates, looks at how environmental reporting will be done. And we want robust environmental reporting, we want independent environmental reporting, but we don't like what the bill does here, because it will give the Minister the power to use regulations to specify what a council will monitor and how it will do that, what environmental indicators the council is required to monitor, and what standards or methods will apply to each of those. So there is no opportunity for parliamentary scrutiny on those measures, and given the opportunity for the ministry and the minister to influence that through regulations.
I call Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I take a call on Part 2 of the Resource Management Reform Bill. And I want to speak in terms of some of the comments that have been made